You are just the house sitter, Beatrice. This apartment suits your sister's lifestyle better. My father said this right before he shoved me hard enough to crack my head against the hallway table. I touched my forehead and felt warm blood. Behind him, inside the apartment I paid the mortgage on, my mother was throwing my clothes into garbage bags while my pregnant sister, Sarah, measured the living room for a crib. Sign the papers, he spat, looking down at me on the floor. Or I will make sure you never work in this city again. I did not scream. I did not fight back. I stood up, wiped the blood from my face, and walked away in silence. Because I knew something they didn't. Have you ever had family treat you like an ATM instead of a person? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. I want to see how many of us have survived this. I sat on the edge of a generic hotel bed 3 blocks away, holding a bag of vending machine ice against my temple. The throbbing in my head was a rhythmic reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy, somewhere below the golden child, and just above the furniture. I did not cry. I did not call a friend to vent. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet. That is what I do. I am Beatrice. And for the last 7 years, I have managed supply chain logistics for one of the largest shipping firms on the East Coast. My job is to track things that go missing. Containers, assets, money, and find out exactly who took them. It is funny, really. I spent my days auditing million-dollar losses for strangers, but I never audited the theft happening under my own roof. Until tonight. Tonight, the physical blow from my father finally knocked the blinders off. It was not just about the apartment. It was about the Beatrice tax, the cost of being the responsible one in a family of parasites. I looked at the spreadsheet, scrolling back 5 years. The numbers were cold, hard, and undeniable. Specifically, the $60,000. That was the number that used to keep me awake at night. When I was 24, I had saved that money for a down payment. I worked double shifts in a non-air-conditioned warehouse, scanning inventory until my fingers bled, eating instant ramen so I could bank every cent. I put it in a joint account with my mother because she convinced me it was safer and helped with my credit score. I remembered the day I went to the bank to get a cashier's check for my first place. The teller looked at me with pity. Miss, the balance is $40. My parents had drained it. $60,000, gone in a week. When I confronted them, my mother did not even apologize. She just said Sarah needed to find herself. You know how sensitive she is. Europe will be good for her mental health. So while I went back to the warehouse, sleeping on a friend's futon, Sarah was posting photos from the Amalfi Coast, drinking wine paid for with my sweat. They told me I was selfish for bringing it up. They told me family helps family. And I believed them. I swallowed the rage and worked harder. I rebuilt my savings, dollar by dollar, alone. That is why this apartment was different. This condo in Coral Gables was not just real estate. It was the first thing in my life that was legally, completely mine. My name on the deed. My money in the mortgage. No joint accounts. No access. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I was not a resource to be harvested. And they knew that. That is why they invaded it. They did not just want to help Sarah. They wanted to break the one thing I had kept for myself. They looked at my clean floors and my quiet office and saw wasted space. They looked at me and saw a placeholder. I closed the laptop. The ice in the bag had melted into cold water, dripping onto my hand. My head still hurt, but the confusion was gone. They thought they had won because they held the ground. They thought that by changing the locks, they had locked me out of my own life. But they forgot what I do for a living. I do not just find missing things. I punish the people who take them. I picked up my phone. I did not call the police. Not yet. I called a number I had saved for a nuclear option I hoped I would never have to use. It was time to stop being the daughter. It was time to be the auditor. I returned to the apartment the next morning. I had replaced the ice pack with a sterile bandage taped across my forehead. I wore old jeans and a sweatshirt, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. I looked like a woman who had spent the night crying in a cheap hotel room, which was exactly what they needed to see. When I unlocked the door, James had grudgingly unlocked it after my text, saying I was coming to surrender. The smell hit me first. Coffee and bacon. They were making breakfast in my kitchen, using my Le Creuset pans. Sarah was lounging at the island, scrolling on her phone. My mother was wiping down the counter. My father was reading a newspaper at my dining table. They looked comfortable. They looked like they belonged. I am glad you came to your senses, my father said, not looking up from the paper. We did not want to involve lawyers, Beatrice. But you forced our hand. I know, I said, keeping my voice small. I cannot fight you. I cannot afford the legal fees, and I cannot lose my job over a family dispute. You win. I will move out. Sarah smirked, taking a sip of orange juice. Finally. I told you she would fold, Daddy. She always does. But there is a problem, I said, stepping further into the room. The condo board. My mother froze. What about them? They know I am moving out. I lied. They monitor the security logs. This building has a strict owner-occupied clause. They are purging rentals. If they think Sarah is just a tenant or a guest, they will initiate eviction proceedings immediately. They are aggressive. They fined a guy $10,000 last week, just for having an unauthorized roommate. Panic flickered in Sarah's eyes. She wanted the luxury life, but she could not handle a legal battle with a billionaire's row HOA. So? Fix it. I can, I said, pulling a thick document from my bag. I spoke to the board president this morning. There is a loophole. The residency exemption. If the occupant can prove they have significant personal assets located inside the unit collateral, basically they can be classified as a stakeholder instead of a tenant. I laid the document on the island. It was titled Affidavit of Personal Assets and Residency Declaration. It looked terrifyingly official, complete with spots for notarized signatures. You need to list the high-value items in the apartment, I explained. The furniture, the electronics, the art. You need to swear legally that these belong to you, Sarah, that you brought them in. That shows financial stability. If you sign this, the board backs off. This was the moment. This was the cliff edge. Any rational person would hesitate. Any honest person would say, but I do not own this TV. I did not buy this rug. But I was not dealing with rational people. I was dealing with parasites. And here is the thing about parasites. They suffer from a terminal case of the Dunning-Kruger effect. They are so convinced of their own superiority, so drunk on their own entitlement, that they cannot conceive of a world where they are outsmarted. They do not see a trap. They see a red carpet. They believe the world owes them the lie. Sarah did not ask if it was legal. She did not ask if it was perjury. She just saw a piece of paper that certified she was rich. She grabbed my pen. The TV, she said, writing. That is the Sony OLED, right? Put that down. And the leather sectional. And the Vitamix. She went down the list, claiming my life as her own. But then she started listing the other things. The things I bad not bought. The Chanel boy bag, she muttered, writing it down. The Dyson Airwrap. The MacBook Pro. I watched her hand move across the paper. She was listing, item by item, over $28,000 worth of merchandise she had purchased using the credit card she opened in my name 3 months ago. She was creating a notarized confession of possession of stolen goods. Dad, you need to sign as the witness, Sarah said, shoving the paper at him. It proves you vouch for the assets. James stood up, puffed out his chest, and signed with a flourish. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer. See? It is not that hard to be helpful, Beatrice. No, I said, taking the clipboard back. I looked at the signature. It was perfect. It is not hard at all. I walked out with the document in my bag. They went back to their breakfast. They thought they had just secured a condo. They had just signed their own arrest warrants. Back in the silence of my hotel room, I did not rest. I executed the second half of the pincer maneuver. See, my family thought the battle was about who got to sleep in the master bedroom. They did not realize I had already nuked the battlefield. While they were busy measuring drapes, I had been on the phone with Mr. Henderson. He represents a corporate investment firm that specializes in distressed assets. They buy properties for cash, sight unseen, usually from people going through divorces or bankruptcies. They close in 7 days or less. The catch? They pay significantly under market value. I looked at the DocuSign envelope on my laptop screen. Selling to Henderson meant losing $30,000 of equity. $30,000 of my hard-earned money. Vaporized just to speed up the clock. A younger version of me would have cried over that loss. The current version of me saw it as an extraction fee. It was the price of a clean severing. I clicked sign. As of 9 a.m., this coming Saturday, the apartment would legally belong to a faceless corporation with a zero-tolerance policy for squatters. I was not just kicking them out. I was transferring them into the jurisdiction of a multi-billion-dollar legal team. Then, my phone lit up. The notification I had been praying for. Card not present, transaction approved. $4,250. Vendor. Royal Tot Luxury Furnishings. I opened the app. Sarah had not just bought a crib. She had ordered the Windsor Collection hand-carved mahogany, velvet lining, the works. And because she was Sarah, she had paid an extra $300 for expedited Saturday morning delivery. I smiled. It was almost too perfect. You see, proving she stole my identity to buy the handbags in the closet is messy. It is a he said, she said scenario about who authorized the purchase months ago. But catching a suspect physically signing for a package purchased with a stolen credit card? That is a prosecutor's dream. It is called a controlled delivery. I dialed Detective Miller. I had met him Monday morning when I filed the initial identity theft report, handing over a thick file of unauthorized transactions dating back 6 months. He was a man who hated paperwork but loved a slam dunk. "It is Beatrice," I said when he picked up. She took the bait. "A $4,000 delivery is scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. She will be there to sign for it." "You are sure?" Miller asked. "I am looking at the tracking number right now. It requires a signature. She is going to sign my name." "All right," Miller said, his voice shifting from tired to interested. "I will talk to the captain. We will swap the driver out. If she puts pen to paper, we take her down." I hung up and looked at the live feed from my living room camera. Sarah was holding up paint swatches against the wall, arguing with my mother about sage versus seafoam. They looked so secure, so permanent. They had no idea that the ground beneath them had already been sold, and the furniture they were waiting for was being delivered by the police. They wanted a housewarming. I was going to give them an eviction. Saturday morning, I sat in a rented sedan down the street, engine idling, watching my own apartment building. Beside me, Mr. Henderson, the corporate acquisitions manager, checked his watch. He was a man of few words, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car. He held a set of master keys and a folder containing the final sale documents. "Delivery truck is 2 minutes out," I said, checking the tracking app. "And the police?" Henderson asked, not looking up from his phone. "Staged around the corner. Detective Miller just texted. They are ready." I looked up at the windows of Unit 204. I could see movement. Balloons, streamers. My family was throwing a party, a sip and see for the new apartment, inviting aunts, uncles, and cousins to marvel at Sarah's good fortune. They were drinking champagne in a home they did not own, celebrating a victory that was actually a trapdoor. It was the height of hubris. They felt so untouchable, so protected by their delusions of grandeur, that they did not even consider the possibility of consequences. They thought I was gone, defeated, erased. A white delivery truck turned the corner. It was not a standard courier van. It was an unmarked box truck, the kind used for high-value freight. The driver wore a generic uniform and a cap pulled low. It was Officer Rodriguez, one of Miller's team. He pulled up to the curb. I watched him unload a massive box, the Windsor Collection crib. He wheeled it into the lobby. "Showtime," I said. Mr. Henderson nodded. We got out of the car and walked toward the building. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange, icy calm. This was not revenge. This was simply the bill coming due. We entered the lobby just as Officer Rodriguez buzzed Unit 204. "Delivery for Sarah Miller," he said into the intercom. "Send it up." Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless with excitement. We rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened on the second floor, the noise hit us. Laughter. Clinking glasses. The smell of expensive catering. The door to Unit 204 was propped open with a doorstop, my doorstop. I walked in first. The living room was packed. My Aunt Patty was admiring the view. My cousin Mike was eating a canapé on my white sofa, and in the center of it all, Sarah was clapping her hands as Officer Rodriguez wheeled the box into the room. "It is here," she squealed. "Oh, Tyler, look! It is the crib." Tyler, her fiancé, stood by the window, looking less enthusiastic. He looked tired. Maybe he was starting to realize that the math of Sarah's life didn't add up. "Sign here, ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, holding out a digital pad. Sarah grabbed the stylus. She didn't even look at the screen. She signed with a flourish. That was the moment. The ink was the evidence. The signature was the confession. "Police!" Rodriguez shouted, dropping the act instantly. "Hands behind your back." The room went dead silent. The music seemed to cut out as if someone had pulled a plug on the world. Detective Miller and 2 uniformed officers swarmed in from the hallway behind us. Sarah froze, the stylus still in her hand. "What? What is this?" "Sarah Miller. You are under arrest for identity theft, credit card fraud, and grand larceny," Miller announced, his voice booming off the walls. He grabbed her wrists and spun her around. The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "No!" Sarah screamed, struggling. "I bought this. This is my apartment. Beatrice. Beatrice, tell them." She spotted me then, standing by the door with Mr. Henderson. Her eyes went wide, pleading, terrified. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the panic, "Mr. Henderson owns this apartment. He bought it 3 days ago." "Trespassing," Henderson added smoothly. "You are all trespassing on corporate property. Everyone needs to leave. Now." "This is insane." My father, James, pushed through the crowd, his face purple. "You cannot arrest her. She owns everything in here. We signed a paper. We have that paper, sir, Detective Miller said, pulling the affidavit from his jacket pocket. A sworn statement listing $28,000 worth of stolen goods as her personal property. And you signed as a witness. James stopped. The blood drained from his face as he realized what he had done. He had not protected her. He had framed her. And you are under arrest, too, Miller continued, nodding to a uniformed officer. We have a medical report and video evidence of an assault on Miss Beatrice Miller 3 days ago. I am her father, James shouted as the officer grabbed his arm. I was disciplining her. I watched them struggle. I watched the relatives, the aunts who had ignored me, the cousins who had mocked me stare in absolute horror as the perfect family was dismantled in real time. It was not a tragedy. It was a transaction. They had bought their arrogance on credit. And now the bank was foreclosing. And I stood there, untouched, unbothered, watching the balance settle. The police cleared the apartment with professional efficiency. It did not take long. My family's delusions of grandeur fit into surprisingly few evidence bags. From the lobby, I could hear Sarah screaming in the back of a squad car. She wasn't screaming for a lawyer. She was screaming for her daddy to fix it. But James could not fix anything. He was being read his rights, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face gray with the realization that his bullying tactics did not work on the penal code. Linda was the only one left standing on the curb, sobbing into a silk handkerchief, looking at the neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. I walked over to Tyler. He was standing by his car, looking like a man waking up from a coma. He was holding the engagement ring Sarah had thrown at him during the arrest. I am sorry, he whispered, staring at the ground. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. I pulled a sealed envelope from my purse. It was marked, for the groom. You might want to read this before you post her bail. He took it, his hands shaking. Inside was the DNA test proving the baby wasn't his, along with the bank statements showing where his down payment money had actually gone. I watched him open it. I saw the moment the truth hit him. He did not look back at the police car. He got into his vehicle, tossed the ring onto the passenger seat, and drove away. That was the last loose end. I walked over to Mr. Henderson. I handed him the spare keys and the access fobs. The place is yours, I said. Sorry about the mess. We have seen worse, he said, handing me a check. The remaining equity. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to start over. I turned to leave, but my mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was weak, desperate. Beatrice, how could you? We are your family. You destroyed us. I looked at her hand on my arm until she let go. Then I looked her in the eye. I didn't do this, Mom. You did. You stole. You lied. You assaulted me. I just turned on the lights. I did not wait for a response. I got into the waiting Uber. The driver asked if I was heading to the airport. Yes, I said. One way to Chicago. As the car merged onto the highway, I pulled out my phone. I navigated to my contacts. Mom. Dad. Sarah. I hit block. 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 The throbbing in my head finally stopped. The Miami skyline faded in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in 29 years, the silence was not lonely. It was free. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, hit that subscribe button. We are building a new city, one brick at a time.